All right, so if you're new here, typically what we do is during this part of the service, we'll talk about something Jesus said or one of his followers said. We'll package it in what we call a series with a name and a little graphic and whatever. But every once in a while, we stop to take a week to address something that's right in front of us. And that's what we're going to do this week. But before we jump into it, I'll tell you a little story. So recently, I've got this shed in my backyard. Let me start there. I've got a shed. Now, the shed, it does this thing, right, where whenever it's raining outside the shed, it's also raining inside the shed. I mean, it literally just pours through the roof, and you can go in there when it's not raining and look up, and you can see light coming through. You can see the sunlight through the ceiling, and there's no skylight, and so it's not supposed to be that way. So eventually I realized, okay, I got to do something about this. Now, I'm not a roofer. I don't know anything about roofing, but YouTube does, and so I figured I'm going to watch some videos and try to figure this out, and I did. I called my dad, needed to enlist some help. And we got to it. We started ripping off the old roof, trying to put on a new roof, and we learned a lot during the process. I got into a little bit of a rhythm, assigned him a role, assigned myself a role. We tried to figure out a system. He was cutting. I was trying to lay the tiles or the shingles on the thing, and not tiles. I told you I'm not a roofer. And we made some mistakes. But where we could, we fixed the mistakes, and now the roof is done. Yeah, I know. It's exciting. I love when it rains. But listen, like now I look at that shed, and to you, it's just a roof. But for me, it's so much more. There's this feeling of real internal satisfaction when I look at this thing, because I know that what went into it. I know like the failures, the struggles. I know the systems we had to put in place. I know there's principles that I've learned about this, and it's just, I look at it, and really the feeling, I'm not bragging, but the feeling is it's like a job well done, right? There's a deep appreciation for this and a deep sense of satisfaction toward this shed, even though you might see it as just a regular roof of a shed. In the ancient world, there is a term for this, and it's a term we're familiar with. We would translate this term great. Great. It has this idea of being like great in English, but in an above average level of quality, of meaning, like it is just deeply satisfying. Have you ever felt that way about something? Like, maybe it was a course you took, maybe it was a project you had, but you'd finished something, right? You know what I'm talking about? And you look at it, and it's just, there's this real internal sense of gratification, of satisfaction. You ever been there with something, right? Finish something big, something that meant something? It's a good feeling. Could you imagine looking back at your life and feeling that way, right? Like, you made some mistakes. There are some shingles that weren't quite right, but you learned some principles, and you put them in like front. You kept those things front and center. There were some things you figured out along the way, and when you look at your life, there's this feeling of something great was accomplished. There's a feeling of a job well done. And I'm not talking about being arrogant or full of yourself or anything like that, but a deep sense of satisfaction and appreciation internally. Or maybe life, maybe like it's too grand, too big, but what if it was just a season of life or an area of life? Like where you just have this deep internal sense of well done, of like that was something great. Maybe it's as a student, as a parent, as an employee, right? And the question is, like, if we're going for great, what does it take to get there? What are the principles? What do you have to keep front and center? What can you do? What can't you do? Like, how do you get to great? From like a life standpoint, but maybe even just an area of life standpoint. Like, what is the way to living a life that gives you that sense of a job well done? You and I, like we have, maybe you've never articulated it, but you do have a way that you think gets you there. You may not have actually written it out and thought like, okay, if I do this, then I'll look back on my life one day and feel like, yes, I'm glad I did that. Like, yes, I'm sad, but you do have one. And so have you thought about what it is? Like, is it an income? Some people think like if I could just get to there, then I'll feel like I've done something great. I've accomplished something great. Maybe it's something you want to accumulate. Maybe it's a position. Maybe it's living in a certain place. Maybe it's your kids accomplishing a certain thing. But probably you have a few things where you're like, this, if we're going for great, this is the way to get there. Jesus, surprisingly or not, actually addressed this because this is a common theme. Like all of us, to some extent or another, in some area of life or another, we're all going for great. We're going for that feeling of accomplishment, of well done. And he addresses this because it's so central to the human condition. And what I love about this teaching, like what he says here, is that really even if you're not totally on board with the whole Jesus thing, if you're not totally sure he is who he said he is, or if he can be trusted, or any of that, maybe you're not a church person, there's still something so valuable and so true that is universal for all of us here. We just often don't look at it this way. But he says it with complete clarity. And so here's the situation, right? He's with these guys. We call them, and there were some girls there too. We call them the 12 disciples, which just means student or follower. They went with him everywhere. They wanted to learn how he did things, how he saw things. They wanted to become like him. And for him, like all along the way, for 3 years, he's trying to teach them what he wants them to know, these things that are central to the human heart. Can you ask Tom to flip the switch? We're getting like overcast in here. And here's what happened. Here's what happens. Jesus says this. He's with those 12 disciples, and they're on their way to a city called Jerusalem, which is where everything super important in the religious world happened. He's on his way to Jerusalem, so he says, we're going up to Jerusalem. He's with these followers, and he says, the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. Now, Jesus, he refers to himself here as the Son of Man. He's referring to himself in the third person. Not because he's one of those people that refers to himself in the third person, but because he's actually trying to help his followers understand who he is. He's referencing this ancient promise made about him, which is kind of a different story for a different time, but he's talking about himself. He's like, I'm going to be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law, which is surprising because if you're one of those 12 followers, you're like, wait a minute, those are the good guys in the story. We respect those people. What do you mean delivered over to them? But that's what he says. And here's what's going to happen. He says, they'll condemn him to death. He's saying they'll condemn me to death. And we'll hand him over to the Gentiles. This word means nations. He's going to be handed over to the Roman Empire, Rome, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him, and kill him. And he says 3 days later, he'll rise again. This is the third time he's explained this to them. He wants them to be prepared for what they're about to witness because it's a big deal and they're not expecting it, right? They're not expecting their respected leaders to turn Jesus over to the Romans. Now, this is a big thing. This is a serious thing. He's saying he's going to be brutally beaten and killed, okay? And here's what happens. 2 of these 12 guys, James and John, they've got a question. Prompts a question. They're like, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, they were brothers, came to him. They say, teacher, right after he says all this, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. It's like, now? You know, like this seems poorly timed. My kids, like sometimes I'm sitting them down, I'm like trying to get them to wrap their mind around something. I'm like, you know, you really can't treat him like that, or you really shouldn't do that to her. And they're like, oh yeah, just like get to it. And then I finally finished, they're like, okay, now can we have ice cream? And it's like, you weren't listening the whole time, were you? This is the vibe I get from this situation. They're like, okay, he's doing that. This is the third time. He's saying that thing again. When he's done, let's get to what we really want to know from him. So he goes, okay, well, what do you want me to do for you? And they replied, they say, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in glory. Jesus is explaining to them that he's going to lose his life. in like a very short time. And these two guys, they're concerned about who's going to sit shotgun with him. It seems totally insensitive, but they have this idea. He's told them that he's someone significant. They don't know what it's going to look like, but they have this idea of him taking a seat as king, of being crowned as king. And they're like, when that happens, we don't understand all the stuff you're saying, but when that happens, like, can one of us be here and the other one just be there? We'll work it out amongst ourselves, who's on which side. But can we just make sure we get the good seats? And for them, what's important about this, as we're looking at it for us today, for them, this is what great looks like. It's not that they actually need to sit in those seats. It's what those seats would say about them. It's because for them, this is what it looks like to look back on their lives and feel like we did it. We made it. Well done. For them, this was the significance. It wasn't the position that they wanted. It's what the position said. It wasn't the seat. It's what the seat said. It wasn't that they were right next to him. It's what that would say about them, about their lives to themselves. Like, that was the picture of greatness. And so Jesus clarifies for them. You see, like, the immense patience of Jesus here. Instead of criticizing them, being like, did you just hear what I said? He gives them an actual explanation. He's like, you don't know what you're asking. You don't understand how this works. He says, can you drink the cup I drank or be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? He's not talking about going down to Venetian shores and getting baptized. What he's saying to them was a lot clearer to them than it was to us, is to us. But what he's saying is, can you go through what I'm going to go through? Do you know what my journey is going to look like? Are you really, like, are you able to handle that? And they're like, like the impatient children. They're like, yeah, we can. Yeah, we got it. Yeah. And so Jesus says, okay, you will drink the cup that I drink, and you'll be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with. You're going to go through what I'm going through in a very similar way. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they've been prepared. They don't get it. And then here's what you would expect, right? It says, remember there were 12 of them? Well, minus 2, there's 10. When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Like, really? Really? Like, we're in this together. You're going to try and, like, go around us, make sure you get the good seats at the thing? They're upset. And so Jesus kind of steps in and tries to make peace here and explain what's at the heart of this whole discourse. He says, you know, that those who are regarded, are seen as rulers in positions of accomplishment of the Gentiles, of the nations, like the other countries, he says, you know that they lord it over them. Like, they've made it. And they exercise, their high officials exercise authority over them. And they're like, yeah, like that's what we're asking with the seat here and the seat there. That's why the other ones are upset, because they want those seats next to Jesus. They want what that will say about them. But he clarifies, like, very quickly. He's like, not so with you. It doesn't work that way. And here's what he says next. Like, he doesn't rebuke them or criticize them for wanting this. He's like, what that feeling of well done, of like wanting to do something meaningful with your life, it's not a bad thing, but you're going about it the wrong way. And he clarifies, he says, instead, whoever wants to become great, there's the word. If that thing you're searching for internally, you think that the way there is through that position, through that accomplishment, through accumulating this spot. You think that that's where it is, but actually, whoever wants to become great among you must become your servant, not under. And then he builds on this. He goes, and whoever wants to be first among you must be slave of all. Now, you and I hear slave, like we think American history, slavery, but the idea here is slavery in the Roman Empire. It's a different thing, but the idea, there's two words, two positions in that culture that communicate living for the good of someone else. And they're the word servant and the word slave in that culture. He's saying, like, really the way to greatness is by living for the good of other people. And then he says something that you can sit and think about for hours, and it will blow your mind in different ways as time passes. He says, for even the Son of Man, even Jesus, didn't come to be served. Like Jesus, if Jesus is who he says he is, like God himself, he's like, I'm not here to be served, but to serve. He came to serve people and to give his life, not his spare time, not like a little extra energy, but all of him as a ransom for many. What he's saying here is that the way to that feeling of greatness is like very simply in serving and giving. Serving and giving. And that's, like, it may seem counterintuitive, but we know this, right? Like, the people in your life that you respect the most, what is it you respect about them? The people that you want to be like, what is it about them that you want to be like? The people that have made an impact on you, what is it about them? It's in what they gave to you, what they invested in you, not in what they were able to take from you. It's what they did for you, right? When you tell a story, you go to a funeral, listen to the way people talk about other people, what made their life great. It's like, well, they were doing this. They did this for people. They did this for me. They did this for her. He gave of his time. He gave of his energy. He served and he gave. Those are the things we use to talk about people's greatness. In fact, even right now, if you look back on things in your life that you're super proud of, that no one can take from you, they're most likely, I'm willing to bet, probably in the category of things you've produced, like ways that you've served and things that you've given, not things you've accumulated. What he's saying here is that real greatness, that real sense of satisfaction of a job well done is not in what you consume, it's in what you produce. It's not in what you take, it's in what you give. It's not in what you receive, it's in what you have to offer. The people in our society that we write about in history books, the biographies that we read, the things that we celebrate as a culture, it's serving and giving. Ways that people have served society and people and what they've given to it, right? Like Martin Luther King Jr., somebody we respect, talk a lot about. Anybody know what his income was? Nope. I don't. I mean, maybe you do. But we talk about his greatness through what he did for people. The selfless things that he did. We've talked about this a few weeks ago. We talked about what we call the impact question. We can call it something else. We call it the serving question, the giving question, the question of greatness. Like what most of us ask, what we naturally ask is, how can this situation, this thing, this whatever, how can it be better for me? How can I get more from it? How can I make this more beneficial for me, win in bigger ways? But the question of impact, the question of greatness, the question of serving, the question of giving is, how can this be better because of me? And this is what Jesus is trying to get his followers to understand. Like, if you want to live a life that you look back on and feel like, I did something, it'll be in ways you showed up to serve and to give. Like, how can I improve this? You know what's amazing? It's amazing how this actually works from a psychological standpoint. Like, what's going on in your mind when you think this way? And you can do something that looks the same but think differently about it, and there's something different happening in your mind. Like, for example, you can want to be a good mom, or you can want to be a good dad, because that's something you want, and it's how you want to understand yourself as a good parent, right? Which is not a bad thing. Or you can try to offer your children the best you possibly can. One is really about me. The other is really about serving and giving. Right? You can want to be the best employee, and your boss could love you for that. But there's actually something different going on if you walk in and want to make your organization better because you're there. You might do the same thing, but internally there's something different happening, and when we fail, we handle it differently. If it's about me, we handle it in a different way than we would if we're genuinely doing it for someone else. I was listening to somebody not too long ago who was talking about social anxiety, right? Which is a really common thing. You go into a situation that's uncomfortable with people you don't know, and they're like, this is just how the human mind works. The best thing you can do in a situation where you're going to be anxious is rather than thinking, how am I going to be perceived? What are they going to think of me? What's this going to do for my reputation? You just walk into the situation thinking, what can I bring to this conversation? Like, what's going on in their world? How can I serve them? What are some questions I can ask? What do they need from me in this conversation here? And it has a way of just calming the storm within you. This is just how we were made. And this is what Jesus is talking about. We were made to not think, how can I get the most out of this, but to think, how can I bring the most to this? It's not about what you take in, it's about what you give. Okay, now here's the crazy thing. All right, like hard shift. If you think back to that situation, Jesus telling these people what greatness looked like. You know what's crazy about it? They believed him, and they did what he said. Not right away. It took some time for them to get it, but eventually, they believed him, and they did what he said. You know what happened? It literally changed the world. In fact, as hard as it might be to wrap your mind around this, you and me are here in this room today doing what we're doing right now because they believed him and they did what he said. There's a guy named Luke who wrote down what the church looked like when it first started. He wrote about it in the book of Acts. But historians who don't follow Jesus and didn't buy into the whole thing did similar things where they would write down what it was like to be part of this early church, this little group of people that lived to serve other people. People who, after Jesus was gone, was like, okay, we're going to follow the way of Jesus who came to serve and to give, and we're just going to show up to our communities, to our relationships, to the people in our lives to serve and to give. And what they did was so countercultural, it stood out like crazy, and people were attracted to it. It showed people a vision of life that was irresistible, and it grew uncontrollably. They had very few resources. They had no political power. In some places, they actually got opposition from political authorities, and yet more and more people just wanted to be part of this because while it's great for one person to live this way, it's world-changing. Like it is for a group of people to live this way. When a group of people shows up and says, not how can we make this better for us, but how can we make this better because of us? Because of us. Luke writes about it like this. This is in Acts chapter 2. You should read the whole thing. It's pretty crazy. He says, all the believers, people who believed what Jesus said, were together and they had everything in common. They were on the same page. They all were trying to do the same thing. He says, they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. This is next level generosity. This is not like, all right, I have a little extra, fine, you can have it, and I'll skip my trip to the candy store. This is like, I'm getting rid of what I have because someone needs something. And so that was radical. That's what they did, giving, right? And then he goes on, he says, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts, which practically speaking was just a great place to assemble. And they would remind themselves of what Jesus taught them. They broke bread together. They developed relationships. They ate together. It's a sign of acceptance, community. They broke bread together in their homes with glad and sincere hearts while praising God, and get ready for this. This is the showstopper. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. Now, let me remind you, this is the first summarized description of what the church was. Enjoying the favor of all the people. In other words, people liked them. And it says, the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Like, it was so beautiful, this way of serving and giving and being for a community. People just wanted to be part of it. It was attractive. It was magnetic. And they grew in favor with people. They enjoyed the favor of people. This church was loved by people that weren't part of it. because this group of people, they were literally a church for the people who weren't part of their church. If you've been around for a little while, you've probably heard us say that we're a church for people who don't go to church. We don't just say that because it's like cute or because it has a nice little bounce to it. What we're saying is we want to be the kind of church that is for the community, that is here to give and to serve, not to take, like how can this be better for us, but how can this place be genuinely better because of us? This is what Jesus said would make a group of people great, would make a life great, and together, like, leave a lasting impact. There is something that has the power to change an entire community when a group of people shows up and in a radical counterculture way ask themselves, how can I make this better? What can I give? What can I serve? What can I do to make this better? About 5 years ago, we sat in a backyard at the Torsivia's house before this church started, and we asked these kinds of questions, like, what would it look like in 2024, or 2020 at the time? What would it look like today to be a church for people who don't go to church? What if our community was glad that we were here, whether they attended or not? In other words, what if we enjoyed the favor of all people? I don't know about you, but when you think about the idea of the church enjoying the favor of all people, that's not something I think of when I think of church. Right? Like, now, Jesus said there will be people that don't like you. He said the world will hate you. Like, there will be persecution and suffering and struggling. But you know why? You know why? And you know what was true of this early church? It was because they believed that Jesus was God. Like, in a culture where they were supposed to say Caesar is Lord, they would say no, Jesus is Lord. And life became really tough because of that. That was the big hang up. That was the big thing. But otherwise, they were loved by people. Now, that's not the experience that I've had here on Long Island, like in this part of the country. Right? Like, I don't know about you, but my friends who are like, no, I don't want anything to do with church. It's not my thing. It's not like I can't wrap my mind around the idea that Jesus is Lord, but I love those people. No, it's like, no, they're judgmental, they're hypocritical, they just want something from you, they're like, they can't be trusted. There's all, fill in the blank. We've done a whole series about this. And maybe it's because we've lost sight of what it looks like to be great. Of what Jesus meant when he said, we're here to serve, to give. And let that speak for itself. That's what Jesus meant when he said, you're the light of, like, the light of the world. The salt of the earth. Like, it's a breath of fresh air. It's a light in a dark place. That's what the church has been invited to be. If you ask your friends if the reason they don't want to be in church is because they're not sure about if Jesus is Lord or not, like, is he really who he said he was? No, most people don't have a problem saying that. Yeah, sure, I believe Jesus is God. Great. Now leave me alone. Don't ask me to go to church again. Why? And then listen to what they say. Maybe it's because we've lost sight of what Jesus said. And so we've been given this really cool opportunity. About a year ago, around this time, church ended, like service ended, went out, left, and right across the street was the annual fair at Argyle Lake. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people, if you were here, you know, all over the place. It was hard to get in the parking lot. It was hard to get out of the parking lot. It was chaos. It was crazy. And we were competing with what was happening across the street. And something about it didn't feel right. And so my wife, Allie, and I, we went to the fair, and we asked around, found some people that helped run the fair, and I was like, hey, we're from the church, like, right across the street. Are there any needs here? Like, is there any way we could be an asset to this whole thing that it seems like all of Long Island is at right now? And they were like, there's a crazy shortage of volunteers. Every year, it's a struggle to pull this off. We need people to help set up. We need people to help break down. They're like, I'm like, could we do that? And they're like, are you kidding me? Like, surprised we would even ask. And so that's when we started talking about it. And What that's going to take from us, though, what we're going to have to give is a Sunday morning service. And we're not going to be able to do church here if we're going to go out into the community. Actually, no, let me put it this way. Instead of meeting together to talk about how Jesus said we should serve the community, we're given the chance to actually go out and serve the community. To show up and ask, really, the question we're asking is, how can this be better because of us? There's a huge shortage of volunteers and there's a shortage of parking. And you know what's really cool? We just have a brand new parking lot, and it takes well over 100 people to pull off a service here. We've got a team of over 100 people. And so we're like, well, what if we encouraged our team members and invited everyone who comes on Sunday to go be part of that? We'll get t-shirts, we'll have responsibilities, we'll put together a sign-up sheet and just be like, walk over there and be like, here's help. And so we spoke with them, and this is a tough thing to do logistically, but this is what we're going to do. We're going to not have services next week, and we've got a sign-up sheet online. Now, if this is not your church, or you're not sure about this, or it's not your thing, or for whatever reason you don't want to be part of it, there's no pressure. But online, we've got like a form, and there's 2 sections. The first section says, how many slots or shifts do you want to be part of? Are you able to be part of? And the second part is a list of all the available slots, and you could say, these are the ones I would be available to do it. So if you're available for one shift, which would be like 90 minutes, 2 hours, I'm not 100% sure, then you can just click one and all those, and what we'll do is put you in one of them that ends up working for your schedule. There are a lot of details here. We're getting information like as we go, and we're trying to put this together on the fly. It's a challenge, and it's hard. It's actually hard as a church to not have a service on a Sunday, but it's worth it. Because this is what Jesus has invited us to do. And the message that this will send the community and the people who run this event is more valuable, or just as valuable, at least, as the messages that are spoken here in this room and downstairs. And so again, there's no pressure, but if you want to be part of this, you go to our website, or you can scan the QR code. It's right there at the top of the website. This is going to be next week, and so there will be no services. We're opening up our parking lot. The question is, how can we make this better? One thing they said they need are bathrooms, and so we've rented a trailer, one of those bathroom trailers. It's going to be right in front of the church. It's going to be another set of bathrooms. We're going to have a tent. If you want, you can park over here, hang out at the tent before or after the time that you're going to sign up. We've got t-shirts for everybody. We'll have water. There's going to be people hanging out. We're trying to make it a thing. They've also given us whole areas to be in charge of, so we can do it together. Like you can, if you sign up for the hamburger thing, you're going to be with a bunch of other people from this church who are doing the hamburger thing. Because we've been given an opportunity to step in and meet a need. And this is what the church is all about. What we're doing next Sunday is no less spiritual than what we're doing this Sunday. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here because we're out of time. But here's the one thing I want to leave you with. I mentioned earlier, we're here today. This is not an exaggeration. We're here today because those followers of Jesus who were there that day heard what he had to say, and they believed him, and they did what he said. Maybe this is crazy, but I think that if we become that kind of church, I think that years from now, there will be people sitting in seats like these. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. But seats like these, if people like you and me choose to believe him and do what he says. Because that's the way it worked back then, it's the way it worked now. And maybe one day we'll look back and we'll realize that we had the chance to be part of something great.